Let's get going. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our August 9th Town Council meeting. Before we begin, I would like to just go through the evacuation procedures. We have not a full house, but we got some folks in attendance. In the event of an emergency, we have two doors to your left and another one up front here. We would exit the building, cross Middle Road, and await further instruction at the school administration building. And now if we could all stand for a pledge of allegiance and a moment of silence for the men and women serving in harm's way. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. And before we begin, a little more housekeeping. We are streaming the meeting tonight. Those of you that are participating from home through Zoom or through your phone, on Zoom, there's an icon to raise your hand. Will indicate you have a question and we'll call upon you. If you're calling in with your phone, *9 will indicate you have a question. *6 will allow you to mute and unmute your phone. For those of you participating remotely or in person tonight, if you step up to speak, please state your name and address for the town clerk. And with that, we will go through our roll call.
Ms. Jukusa? Here. Ms. Abbott? Here. Mr. Hamilton?
Here.
Mr. Katzman?
Here.
Mr. Kelly?
Here.
Dr. Ryan?
Here.
Mr. Aguilar?
Here. Okay. Next, we have our president's executive summary. Do not have anything to add to that tonight. So we'll move on to our consent agenda.
Move to approve as presented. Seconded.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa? Aye. Ms. Abbott? Aye. Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguilar?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. Next, we'll be sitting as the Board of License Commissioners. We have one item on the agenda. It's a peddler license, mobile food establishment, new. There's Coastal Cones, DBA Ben & Jerry's, 356 Thames Street, Newport, and Baked Foods LLC, DBA The Bite, 691 Main Street, Warren.
Move to approve. Seconded.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0.
Motion to adjourn from the Board of License Commissioners. Seconded.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. Next, we have minutes from our July 11th meeting.
Move to approve as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. Next, we have tax voucher. It's request approval for tax voucher 2022-0809-01 to 2022-0809-02.
Move to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. Next, we have our town administrators report. Mr. Rayner.
Good evening, Mr. President, Town Council, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight, I'm proud to announce that Jennifer West, our town clerk, has earned the designation of Certified Municipal Clerk. This is awarded by the International Institute of Municipal Clerks. This institute grants the CMC designation only to those municipal clerks who complete a demanding educational requirement and have a record of significant contributions to their local government, their community, and the state. So Jennifer, hats off and congratulations on your educational accomplishment and the achievement of this significant milestone. In a previous meeting, I announced Portsmouth received a community support grant from the Newport and Bristol County Convention and Visitors Bureau, commonly known as Discover Newport. The grant is for $7,500 and must be used for projects that enhance the visitors' experience in our municipality. The grant will be managed by our Director of Business Development, and the application for award recommendations will be posted on the town website tomorrow. They will be due by the end of the month. On Tuesday of last week, the Portsmouth Police Department held a National Night Out. It's a community event that we hold annually at Sandy Point Beach. The department hosted face painting, lawn games, and served pizza, popcorn, and sandwiches, which were donated by by local businesses. The evening culminated with a showing of DreamWorks, The Bad Guys. National Night Out is a nationwide initiative that brings the community and the police forces together to promote positive police-community relationships. The event is, as I said, held yearly on the first Tuesday in August, and the Portsmouth Police have participated in National Night Out since 2014. And lastly, I'd like to remind everybody that the Rhode Island State primaries will be held on Tuesday, September 13th. Early voting will be conducted in the chambers here during town hall business hours, August 24th through September 12th. We would ask that any organizations or committees that have scheduled time in the chamber during that period, if possible, schedule to another room in the town hall or police department. And Mr. President, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Rayner. Okay. Next, we are going to move on to resignations and appointments. First, under resignation and the Pension Investment Committee, is the resignation of Ralph McCluskey.
Move to accept with regret.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
And Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. Next, we have appointments. First is the Prudence Island Planning Commission. It was Mr. John Sperato.
Move to approve.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. Next, we have the Economic Development Committee. It's a reappointment for Mr. Emil Cipolla.
Cipolla, motion to approve.
Second.
The reappointment of Mr. Cipolla.
Second.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa? Aye. Ms. Abbott? Aye. Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Capson?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. And finally, we have the wastewater appeals board. It's the reappointment of Colonel John Vickers.
Move to approve.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa? Aye. Ms. Abbott? Aye. Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Capson?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. Next, we are going to move on to old business. First item is our monthly finance report.
Ms. Andrea Turkelson, I believe she is on. Yeah, she is our consultant hired as an interim while we're still searching for a finance director.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yep.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. This evening, I just wanted to introduce myself, and I look forward to working with the council as well as the staff of Portsmouth for the next number of weeks or months, however long I may be of service to all of you. We did provide you with a report for the month ending May 31st. What was provided was a report of expenditures comparing general fund expenditure budget to actual. We will be meeting with you again in a couple of weeks, I believe at your next meeting, where we will provide you with June results, which will essentially bring us right into discussions of your fiscal year results. So we'll provide a deeper dive on not only the expenditures but also the revenues to provide you with a draft a draft picture, if you will, of where things have ended up. But I would like to ask the council if they have any particular questions regarding the May 31st expenditure report.
Questions from council?
Just one, based on your knowledge of, obviously, we don't have a final report, but based on what you've seen throughout the rest of the summer, does it look like we'll be finishing with a mild surplus, or do we have any concerns of finishing with a deficit?
We have no concerns for a deficit. In fact, I think we are on target to produce a surplus, having just started to look at your general ledger. I kind of reserve probably the next couple of weeks to make sure that everything is in order, but everything is looking on target, particularly with expenditures, which is great considering the budget was created many, many months ago, and we're coming out of hopefully our COVID days. So everything is looking on target, and look forward to be able to provide you with some solid numbers at our next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Motion to receive and place on file.
Second.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa? Aye. Ms. Abbott? Aye. Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Capson?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. Okay. Next item is new business, which is going to be a presentation of Mayflower Wind's application to construct a major energy facility in Portsmouth. Tonight, we have representatives from Mayflower Wind to give us an update presentation. Upon completion of their presentation, I'll allow the council to ask some questions before we open it up. I would like to remind folks that this is not a public hearing. This is really an informational session tonight. I will allow comments. I just ask that anybody that will be commenting tonight to try to keep your comments brief and concise. And it should be based on some of the information that's presented tonight.
Mr. President, I have a procedural question.
Sure.
After the presentation, I may be interested in the discussion about engaging either outside counsel or some other professional service that we may, if we feel that that would be in Portsmouth's best interest. But our item is, the agenda item is posted as presentation of application.
Yeah.
So as an open meetings issue, can we discuss that sort of thing and take action? Or do we just proceed the presentation and then we need to
So
Repost.
I don't want to put the cart before the horse too much. I would like for them to be able to give their presentation. And it's my understanding that this is in preparation of the notice that was submitted to the Energy Facilities Siting Board. They will be having a pre-hearing on, hold on a second. They'll be having a preliminary hearing on August 18th. I just didn't have my notes in front of me. I was going to let them speak. But that pre-application hearing with the Energy Facilities Siting Board is just that. It's a opportunity for the Energy Facilities Siting Board to establish the criteria that they're going to use to review the application. It's not open to public comments. It's my understanding that the opportunity for public comments will come once the project is going to continue to move forward with the various applications to agencies. And so I do have some comments that, but I want to allow them to give their presentation. And then we can go from there. So at this point, Mr. Hamilton, you asked to pull this forward. Do you have any comments, questions before they begin?
No, a presentation was made to the Harbor Commission. I thought it'd be a better presentation to the broader council. It would have a wider audience to the broader folks of Portsmouth, and also give Mayflower a chance to explain what the project is, what it isn't, what it potentially could mean for Portsmouth, and also pretty much the entire Seconic River Basin and Mount Hope Basin. So I look forward to their presentation, and we'll take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. So at this point, Mr. Gavin.
I just want to interject based on Mr. Kathman's comments. If the council wants to talk about the legal proceedings and potential action and participation and so forth, I do agree with Mr. Katzman that there's an Open Meetings Act issue here, and I would suggest that we have an executive session at the beginning of the next meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Gavin. All right. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to the folks from Mayflower Wind.
Thank you to the council. We're live now. Good evening. My name is Lawrence Mott, Transmission Development Manager with Mayflower Wind. I am pleased to have my colleagues here, Dugan Becker, who is a community liaison representative living in Newport, and the Director of Public Outreach, Mr. Dan Hubbard. I have been enjoying the pleasure of learning more about Portsmouth. I had my boat hauled out at Pirate Cove this spring for 2 months, working on the boat and participating in Island Park and listening, and literally, yes, going to the bar, because it was an opportunity to learn and listen as we, Mayflower, work to refine this project. Thank you for the opportunity to present before the council. We have had a good opportunity to listen in front of 2 presentations in front of the Economic Development Committee, the Harbor Commission, as noted by Council Member Hamilton, and also the Conservation Commission. So this is important for us to continue that engagement and discuss the pieces of the project and get very specific. This evening, I'd like to move fairly briskly with a description and hit some definitive points so that we can get to some specific questions of yours and then go back as needed and refine that. Mayflower Wind is a joint venture. So we are a project entity. The sponsors that are 50-50 owners are Shell, Royal Dutch Shell, and then Ocean Winds, which is a leading offshore wind developer based in Madrid. We have our offices in Fall River and Boston. And this group, it's important that the project company Mayflower is administered and run and determined by its board of directors and a staff right now of around 60 or 70 right here, primarily in New England, and a real focus within New England. These decisions are made at the Mayflower level, and we have to bring the project forward through all of its paces. The project itself really starts with an offshore wind lease area that was won at auction years ago. This is administered by BOEM, Bureau Ocean Energy Management, and that 127,000 acres is then worked through the federal process of understanding its characteristics, depths, metocean, which is the wave height and patterns, and a variety of data to determine, at this point, it's considered 149 turbine positions with a generation potential of 2,400 megawatts. What's exciting about a project of this nature is this can power millions of homes, large impact of renewable energy coming in. 2 points of interconnection. We've been working within Falmouth and at Brayton Point. I believe you caught the news with President Biden highlighting the notion of the difficulty of finding interconnection points because our grid was originally designed with a Vermont Yankee or some other generation on land, and now we're kind of reconfiguring. So finding the right interconnection point is very difficult. And in this case, we're bringing that generation offshore to the shore, and that's why we're standing here before you tonight. I think it's important, let's just hit right on the timeline. Where are we? What's the status? We are relatively early. The effort as in any business was to understand the lease area and its potential and then win contracts. So we went through 2 rounds of responding to RFPs to win these contracts, 800 megawatts and 400 to bring us to our first project at 1,200 megawatts. And from there, we then go through gathering the pieces, and we've made our initial permit applications as referenced, President, on the EFSB, which is the Rhode Island Energy Facility Siting Board. We've also previously submitted to BOEM and the federal government. It's a very major document called a COP, Commercial Operations Plan, that really sets out the general parameters of what we work within. So when you may see a definition of a large area described within Rhode Island, that's just the definition of the boundaries, but we'll be in a much smaller area as we proceed. The takeaway here is we are in the review, the design, the refinement, and construction would not begin until 24 or 25 with commercial operation date commissioning out in the 2028 period. I highlight changes. You've all heard about it, listed in the news, but there are a lot of generation assets within New England that are retiring. They're either non-economic, primarily non-economic, or they don't meet the current regulations for clean air or other issues. We have a significant change in the grid, as I mentioned, and so we're at a point and a conjecture of New England where we've got to find the next level of generation. Not necessarily using a choice of importing natural gas from, if I may, Pennsylvania. Let's consider this excitement from my basis of being in wind energy for years is we have a local resource right here. We're not going outside. We are working with the significant possibilities right off the coast of Rhode Island and Massachusetts to take advantage of this resource and bring it here and utilize it locally. Another fact of renewable energy versus conventional energy, such as a natural gas or a coal plant, is that wind energy hires 4 times the number of staff. So instead of spending money buying fuel, you're actually paying salaries. So a better benefit for the ability to build jobs and build a long-term workforce on maintaining the wind plant. And indeed, net zero emissions, a key item for Rhode Island is sea level rise and the ability to bring in a zero carbon effort. And again, emphasizing on the second bullet of 8% of the US national goal of 30 gigawatts. So this is a significant opportunity to bring that renewable energy to bear and bring it to all households. This diagram is just trying to help understand a project of this nature. Similar to the picture I showed of the offshore lease, you start on the left hand with the wind turbines offshore. There will be a converter station that collects all the power from those turbines, puts it into 2 cables, and runs those cables all the way through the federal waters, Massachusetts, and then into Rhode Island waters. And then we reach what we refer to as the intermediate landfall of coming out of the Secaunet over Portsmouth, back down into Mount Hope Bay, and continue on to the Brayton Point 345 kV. So we operate at a very high voltage. So that's 345,000 volts. The large transmission lines you see coming across Portsmouth here are 115 kV. It's standard voltage and how we would connect to the grid. So we would then clamp on to the grid with administered by National Grid at their system and their facility. Brayton Point, with the retired and now gone decommissioned coal plant, offers the opportunity to connect onto those existing circuits and move that power out. Recall, electrons and power don't care about state borders. So those green electrons are flooding this area. They're flooding right over these lines. They're right through all the way down into Aquidneck of that energy generation that is coming into this area. I'm glad to come back with other details on this. So in reference to the cable route, I mentioned a moment ago, the dark blue is the overall defined border, but the cable package is approximately 13 inches wide. So the cables themselves can be bundled and put into a single trough. You're usually 4 or 5 feet deep, 4 or 5 feet wide as you plow it, as you would plow a farmer's field, and you plow through the mud, and the cables are then buried down into the seabed. The actual installation right at that moment covers the silt, sand, mud, and material back over, settles back down, and recovers back to, and the various organisms and growth then repopulate themselves within that. The cables don't have any oil or other kinds of chemicals. They're big hunks of copper with a bunch of shielding and polyethylene wrap around them that would come up. Some of the figures here show the distances coming through the waters. This medium green is the Rhode Island jurisdiction, where we enter from the federal waters coming up Narragansett into the Secaunet and then back into Mount Hope Bay. So landfalls at Portsmouth, the goal is to use existing infrastructure and stay on roads. So you see a situation where we come in just on the southwest side of Gould's Island and come into Boyd's Lane. I'll show you in a second where we'll use a method of horizontal directional drilling so that we will drill offshore underneath the mud, underneath some of the existing, but actually on either side of a mooring field that exists right now, under the beach, under the sidewalk, seawall, under Park Avenue, and come up on the north side of Park Avenue on the east side of Boyd's Lane. I'll show you another photo, but I know many of you are familiar right with that particular area, and then go along on the east side of the road It will look as much like what you see now when you see standard equipment putting a 3-4 foot wide trench 5 feet deep alongside burying fiber cables and other fiber work that a power utility would conduct. Again, this is the cable similar to what's buried in the river and the ocean, but it's a little bit different grade for land use. And it would come up right along through the intersection underneath Route 24. And then you can see our 4 routes that we've been working to understand the characteristics, commercial possibilities, and other routes around the archaeological, historic concerns, traffic patterns, and all the other prioritization that you would conduct in order to determine the best route into Mount Hope Bay. Right now, our preference is along Anthony Road, and to consider on this drawing the 2 routes on the most easterly section involving Montauk Country Club. We continue to work all 4 of these routes and understand the characteristics and refine this effort. Little further detail emphasizing how you are within the roads. You're on that shoulder. The red areas are where we would locate this drilling equipment to conduct the near shore actions, and the cables would then be brought up into what's are called vaults. So it's just like a big concrete 6 foot by 15 foot vault. All the equipment would be flush. So when we're done, you'll just see a manhole. So these are buried areas where the cable comes in and you can splice the cable, have your fiber there. So for fiber for communications along with a power, a fiber cable would be in addition to the power, maybe 2-inch diameter. And you can see, again, a picture of these routes. The yellow is the HDD portion, and then the other colors are a trench application. Horizontal directional drilling, again, it is exactly what it says it is. It's a drill, as if you're drilling as you do in any of your houses and work, but that you can actually guide the drill. And so you can drill down. So this, if you think about the top graph, that drill rig is on Boyd's Lane going down underneath Park Ave. And these are approximate distances. They're not exact, but they're not far off. And you can see 25 feet under the beach. You are not at the surface. You're not exposed to erosion. People can be walking on top of the beach and not even realize that this activity is going on, except yes, the drill rig in that area that I showed previously on the red will be noisy as it spends a month drilling and working that area. The bore would then come out to a offshore support vessel. The size of this vessel would be somewhat similar to what you see when you work within the area to rebuild a wharf or a dock, and a barge has a crane on it and comes up to conduct those activities. And then typically you would put a cap on that conduit after you had lined it, and then you would come back and actually pull the cable. And in the lower drawing, you see the cable lay vessel, which has the actual cable spooled, and it is pulled into the HDD and into the vault, and then you progress on the onshore. So why are we coming across Aquidneck Island, and why can't we continue all the way up to Sakonnet River? As many of you mariners and enjoy your recreation and commercial actions here, right at the old stone bridge, you can see by the boxed inset in these photo images the significant change in depth, and you're aware of the currents that flow through there at every tide. And that has scoured the bottom so that the bottom is not so much mud. It's very hard, compacted sand, and it's very difficult to achieve the burial so that we put the cables down deep in a permanent installation out of harm's way, out of fishermen's way and any other commercial activities. And we want to be able to bury them deep enough so moorings, for example, can be placed on top of them, and you can carry on with the activities that the town is accustomed to. As we progress north, again, the up and down of the depth as seen here, we get to the 3 bridges And most difficult is the fact that the old railroad bridge was part of that, as well as the old road bridge were detonated, or some of the debris was left in place. We have that debris on the hard bottom. So the real risk to consider getting around the debris and ensuring that the cables are buried correctly is why we consider that too high a risk and not achieving a sustainable long-term method for safety to the environment, safety to mariners, recreation, and the residents, is why a diversion and coming across through the existing roadways. And that was trying to be crisp. The goal here is to give, as I say, a good picture of it. We are more than welcome to continue through all the details, and I will pause there.
Thank you. Larry, Lawrence. Mr.
Lawrence, thank you for
Lawrence?
asking.
All right, just wanted to make sure. Sue, thank you for the high level overview. I know some counselors may have some questions, so I have a few. I'll defer at the moment. If any other counselors want to begin, if there's any questions, if not, I'll jump in.
I'll jump in. So could you point us to other municipalities where you've had projects take place that are similar to the one you're proposing for Portsmouth?
I cannot. Mayflower is a new venture formed in order to execute this project. So as far as Mayflower is concerned, I would highlight that both the sponsors, Ocean Winds and Shell, have conducted similar projects in other jurisdictions, New Jersey and in Europe. And then I would highlight that the staff have been working in projects similar to this throughout European regions and in other areas. But I will tell you that I don't have any direct examples of Mayflower working in this type of a situation.
Right. Well, even whether it's Mayflower or not, if you could just point to some examples of other companies that have done this kind of work, that would be helpful.
We'd be glad to get, we could put a list for you and come back. Maybe that'd be the most suitable.
Okay, right.
I could think about in Long Island in New York, where Ørsted is working on a project through some of the New York RFPs, and in New Jersey also, and also in Maryland. So we'd be glad to follow up on that and give you specific data, and that will highlight some of the relations with the communities, other established conditions that they've arrived at through discussions through between the developer and the municipality.
Okay, and the second broad question I have is, have your plans taken into account sea level rise and climate change? And if so, how?
Absolutely, they have. All designs would consider the lifetime of a project of a minimum of 40 or 50 years, typically longer. All the components would be assumed to withstand those long-term efforts.
And are you assuming that climate change effects would be as severe as the most recently updated estimates of sea level rise? And, or, I mean, I'd like to know how you're, more
it's good.
specifically, how you're incorporating
I would
climate
actually,
change.
if I may, I'd answer it this way. Our investors are very particular, and they ask us to take the worst case scenarios to make sure that the project is designed and operated to withstand these conditions. So it is a conservative case, i.e. significant sea level rise, and even considering raising the substation converter station location at Brayton Point, even though it's already very high, to consider those conditions. So I emphasize that, yes, to your question, it's conservative, and that we have a very, both engineering groups, regulators, and investors are ensuring that we are doing that.
Okay, and my third and last general question is that I am concerned that Shell is a major partner in this effort. I mean, frankly, if you Google it, there's a lot of talk about how Shell is not a good environmental partner, that they're greenwashing their efforts. And I just would be interested in having you point us to counter arguments that we can trust Shell Oil.
We'd be glad to follow up on more information on that. And it's something as an employee of Mayflower and working through this that we do ourselves consider that and want to make sure that this project moves forward correctly. So you're right. I'm not going to counter any of your statements. So we should follow up and try to demonstrate activities that they are doing correctly.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Mott, I see, maybe I missed a point here, but it looks as though you are planning to connect to the onshore grid via Brayton Point and in Falmouth. Is that right?
I will clarify and thank you for the question. So we have the lease area with approximately 2,400 megawatts of capacity. We are running 1,200 of it, half of it, to Brayton Point for this project. The balance of the remaining area, we are working through the process to get approvals through ISO New England, the regulators and others to connect at Falmouth, or we have also considered the possibility that it would connect again at Brayton Point or at a substation north of Brayton Point called Pottersville. So we don't know yet because we're waiting for the grid regulators to come back with us with a determination.
So you're saying that the point of connection that's available at Brayton Point, the circuitry or whatever is not adequate to handle the entire output of the project?
It may be, but the ISO New England has not yet told us. We are in a very formal process of system impact studies and other electrical studies that will then determine that answer. That answer at the moment is we've been told we won't know until 2023.
And I guess my other question, so when this project is up and running, the power just flows into the grid and it goes everywhere?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ryan.
Kevin. How far offshore is the HVDC converter station?
It's about, what is it? Somewhere around 62 miles south of the Rhode Island jurisdiction, if I remember.
I'm going to need you to come over to the podium. Just provide your name and address.
That's not what it looks like.
Dan Hubbard, I'm with Mayflower as well. It's more accurately south of the vineyard in Nantucket, roughly about 20 miles south of
Okay,
Nantucket.
so it converts it there and then it runs it under
It does.
up the river to Portsmouth?
Yep, it does. So the station would be out
'Cause
there,
I looked up images of those things and they look like oil drilling rigs.
but they're not.
Platforms. I know. But they're massive.
They are, but that's one of the things that's really excellent about the technology is that you can send electricity long distances through the HVDC, and you really keep those converter stations in the farm itself.
Gotcha. All right, thank you.
Mr. Hampton, anything?
A few things, actually. So if you're not able to get the approval in Falmouth, is the cable that you're specifying or going to bury capable of handling the entire load if you wanted to send all 2,400 megawatts through that cable?
The current cable for project one is not, it is designed for its capacity, the amperage that it can carry.
So if you are not able to get Falmouth, you would be looking at burying two cables at two separate times?
That would be determined down the road. We are planning on at 1,200 megawatts presently in Brayton Point as presented today, and additional the balance of the project to Falmouth. There's quite a few things that are sort of up in the air, so it's really a bit early to commit to that. But the other thing I would offer is that the ISO New England has resiliency rules, and you would ask questions, Madam Vice President, about questions about sea level and climate change. And one of those issues is grid resiliency. So they're limited to 1,200 megawatts in an individual cable itself. So that's sort of one of the areas that it promotes grid resiliency. And additionally, on the issue of climate change, you'd asked about, what is Shell doing behind these things? And Shell itself is one of the sponsors. It is, as Lawrence had mentioned, we're locally administered, we're locally ran, we're our businesses in Boston and also in Fall River. And one of the best things that you can do, and one of the reasons that a number of us are engaged in renewable energy to affect climate change, is to help the transition from some of those traditional hydrocarbon energy sources, away from coal, away from LNG, natural gas, away from petroleum fuels. So that really is one of the ways that climate change is baked into the whole idea of renewable energy. I just wanted to offer that thought. So.
Thank you.
Couple other questions. As you traverse the Seconic River, there are two major pipelines that go underneath the Seconic River. One is the single and only gas pipeline that feeds this island. And we've had issues with it just as recently as 5 or 6 years ago. My concern is a disruption in that, specifically as you're laying the cable, and any potential issues in the future. To me, this island needs a secondary pipeline of natural gas on the northern end in order to supply a consistent level of gas on the island. Natural gas is not going away. It's still going to be utilized. We need to make sure that we have, let's start with, what are your plans to ensure that there is no damage to it? Specifically when you're doing it and in the future as the cable is there.
Excellent question, because I agree with you. Natural gas is not going away. And the absolute
Can I ask you to do one
requirement.
favor? Can you just move a little closer to the mic? Just,
Yeah,
I can hear you, but just folks at home might not be able to.
concur with you. Natural gas is not going away. The import of ensuring a reliable supply of natural gas to Aquidneck. The process of what's called crossing infrastructure, other infrastructure, whether it's a gas pipeline, fiber, power lines, sewer lines, is a mature process. As you well know, cables such as this are buried all over the world and have been installed in thinking of dense locations such as the East River and Hudson River in New York City with multiple crossings. There is a designated application, regulatory, installation review process, both with contractors, the parties of the owners, and a third-party review to conduct that. And a determination is made whether you go over or under, and the protection mechanisms that are required to ensure that in this case, the natural gas line is preserved correctly.
There's also a water line as well that you'll be traversing. That would be.
We have a full catalog of those crossings, and we've had initial discussions with all of the responsible parties of those lines, such as you referenced, the water line and the others.
I'll let you know, honestly, my first feeling is to not allow you or to request that the project doesn't move forward until that secondary pipeline is put in, for the very concerns of what happened 5 or 6 years ago and people being frozen out of their houses for 10 days at a time. Reliable gas source, a secondary gas source on this island is very important. The Energy Siting Board is sticking us right now with a half a dozen 10,000 gallon tanks during the wintertime sitting in a neighborhood in order to maintain that pipeline. So my request to you is to think about your partners with Shell, National Grid, Algonquin Energy, and think about a way to get a secondary pipeline on the northern end of this island while you're working through your submittals and your approvals for the cable as well.
Appreciate your emphasis on that, and I'm glad to report that I had heard that previously. So thank you.
Hi, well, I just want to start by saying that I fully support the mission of increasing renewable energy. I think it's what you're doing here is great. I think as town councilors, we've had a lot of people reach out with concerns. So obviously, we're just trying to get as much information as possible to understand what we're committing to. And I might make some assumptions based on things I heard or saw. So if any of those are erroneous, don't hesitate to call me out. But my understanding was that the original plan was to go up the Seconic all the way to Brighton Point. through under the bridges and not through Portsmouth. I imagine at some point there was a feasibility study done to look at that. Just out of curiosity, how much money is Mayflower Wind saving by going through Portsmouth instead of figuring out how to do it through the water?
I'll go in reverse order if I may.
Sure.
It's actually, at this moment, the estimates are likely more expensive to come across Aquidneck or similar, i.e. there is not a major difference. The effort has always focused on the difficulty of transiting from the Old Stone Bridge north and had never intended that we could overcome that. And it always thought that we would have to use the crossing of Portsmouth for the Mayflower project.
Okay, thank you.
President, one more last quick question. Where are you with your environmental impact studies and when will they be completed? And will we have access to those specifically to the wetlands that you'd be potentially going through here in Portsmouth and also for any environmental impact for the shellfishing and regular fishing industry here in Rhode Island and also in Massachusetts?
Absolutely. First and foremost, you will have access to those. Those will go through the rigor of the various agencies in their review. As far as status, we've had continued engagement with the regulators, whether that be CRMC, the siting boards, the other environmental entities and DEM and others that have asked particular questions and given us guidance on further studies. There's been a significant interface with the fishing community on studies that they would require. We're glad to follow up more specifically, but many of those studies have been or are in process of being completed and form some of the basis or a significant part of the EFSB filing, which is currently online and links found on our website.
Thank you, Mr. President. Why 40 feet? Why not 10 or 100? Why 40 feet as the depth of the cable? And related to depth of the cable, how confident are you that you know what you're drilling into in that geography? Marshy, bedrock, whatever.
Thank you. And I think your question is pertaining to the horizontal directional
Yes.
drilling at the shoreline. And typically you conduct that arc in order to facilitate the actual drill rather than going at a straight line. Through that, you're also able to gain more strength and rigidity going down lower. And yes, you will get into bedrock and other hard soils through there, which is in many ways easier because it's a defined sediment that you can then line and carry on.
If I could follow up, my question isn't so much about good bedrock, it's what if it isn't? We all who live here know that it's to be a marshy, not solid ground area at 40-foot depth, it might be bedrock. So how confident are you that you know what you'll be drilling?
No
into?
apologies, I didn't answer the rest of your question.
That's okay.
Which is, yes, we intend to conduct some geotech studies. We're doing the desktop studies and what's available right now. And if I may, what knowledge well drillers have, and then you go from there to actual borers that drill down and conduct samples and core samples, and you really do the full analysis.
And so I just want to make sure I understood your first part of your answer. The reason you're drilling down to a depth of 40 feet and then coming up has to do with the mechanics of simplifying your drilling work, not at some calculation on safety or distance from the surface.
It's both. It's not as black and white. And again, glad to follow up on that. It does depend on the sediment and the other characteristics of the soils. And most importantly, if I may, similar to putting a subway in or a tunnel, you want to make sure you're down below any of the active or movable soils.
All right. I got some questions.
Well, you don't get to ask. That's why you're in that chair. I just had a couple of questions. This is actually following up both on my own question as well as Councilor Hamilton's. So how long is it going to, how long is it going to take for this drilling process through Portsmouth and the laying the cable across Portsmouth? How long will that entire project take, do you think?
Our current estimates and what we've been presenting is that you would conduct it in 2 seasons. So you may spend, for example, 2 months in the winter of 24-25 to conduct the drilling at both ends and get the drilling done. And as I referenced, you may put a cap on it and walk away with a clean site and then come back and pull the cable in the next season, which would take probably a month.
And if it turns out you're going to have to put in a second cable because Falmouth doesn't work out, will you have to repeat that entire process all over again for the second cable?
No, that's the goal, is why we publicized and we're transparent to the Energy Facilities Siting Board, is that it may behoove to conduct some of the pre-work and drill additional holes and put what's called a duct bank within the trench, so that then when you're coming back a few years later, you're just in effect pulling the manhole covers up, the covers off the vaults and pulling the cable rather than tearing things up.
Thank you.
All right, I have a few questions. If we could go back to the beginning with the lease area. So you mentioned the lease area is 127,000 acres, 149 turbines. Is that just Mayflower Wind's lease area, or is it a larger lease area for other entities?
That is Mayflower Wind's lease area.
Okay, so,
And you're right, there are adjoining lease areas on either side.
right, so there is potentially how many lease areas out there? Are there 4 or 7?
Total right now is it 7, 6? 7.
So there's 7 lease areas, each capable of potentially 2,400 megawatts?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you're only representing Mayflower Wind. Is it possible that another lease area could want to pursue a similar course that you're taking right now?
It is possible.
Okay. So it is possible that we could have a separate entity with a separate proposal at some point in the future. I mean, that's just something for us to be aware of as we go through this process. The next question is, your application currently is for how many cables? 1 cable?
Specifically, it is 2 cables, but you can bundle them into
Okay.
one bundle.
So 2 cables carrying 1,200 megawatts,
Correct.
even though you only have the potential for, you said 1,200 to go to Brayton Point. So you're going to drill 2 cables and install 2 cables?
Correct.
Okay. Now, is that the noticed variation that's in your application?
The noticed variation, if it were pursued, i.e. it's just notified at the moment, noticed, then that would be 4 holes to be prepared for the other 2 cables.
So in your application to the Energy Facilities Siting Board, you're also including a request for the additional capacity?
No, it is specifically the notice variation is to discuss what is becoming a request of the regulators that prevents projects being built and then dug up again 2 years later, which is to identify future possible impacts, future changes. And so we provided the notice that said it is possible we would secure through the process of ISO New England a suitable interconnection up towards Brayton Point, and therefore we would identify the possibility of installing this additional open empty pipe, if I may, to pull cable in the future. But if that were to be done, then it's the full formal process to resubmit to the EFSB throughout to get request permitting for that second project. We are only permitting 1 project at this stage.
So they're not even considering the noticed variation that's in the application, or how do they handle the noticed variation? I was confused by it, so I'm just trying to understand how does the noticed variation that's in the application come into play?
It's fairly, as I noted, a fairly new process that was just put forth because of some of the utility projects. So it is, I'm not going to provide any more answer because I don't have a clear one for you.
Okay.
But it is, as I noted, to demonstrate, to clarify what it would look like.
So if that were the case, then this, if approved, you could have potentially 4 1,200 megawatts cables going through this corridor. Both the submarine one and the land.
Well, I want to emphasize again that the notice variation is not a permit application nor ability for EFSB to approve it because we have not submitted the application. So we
know.
would just arrive at a 1,200 megawatt and then they would possibly give us some type of condition that says we want an answer for whether you're going to build that second stage or not at some period in the future.
So I think in terms of co-locating, if another leasee out in the water wanted to co-locate, so say you had your conduits on one side of your box, you send the other out to Falmouth, now you have potentially spare capacity. Could you lease that corridor out to another supplier?
Yes.
So now
Can I throw in a quick question related to what you're asking?
Sure.
Are there any other lessees currently in agreement with Brayton Point to use Brayton Point as their interconnect point?
Excellent question. There are, it's called a queue process, and they have applied to interconnect at Brayton Point, and those are in process similar to ours.
And which ones are those?
There's a group through Ørsted called Bay State Wind.
Are they the only other one at the moment?
They're the only ones that are mature in that basis. There is, the other ones are not at the moment designating they would come up to Secana. It's another area where I'd be glad to come back to you with some of the public lists from ISO New England and other data that shows what's going on at Brayton Point.
Okay, so that potential Bay State Wind could seek an alternate route for a connection to Brayton Point. And I'm just thinking, if Portsmouth is, a viable location, I get concerned about another entity wanting to do what you're doing. So again, what's important for us to convey our concerns through this process is if it is moving forward, that things need to be co-located so that it's the least impacts all the way around, not only for the environment, the town. We had some conversations a little while ago about the construction duration. So what I get concerned with is the mitigation side of things with respect to noise impacts during construction, traffic impacts during construction. These are large operations. It's gonna, when you're, open trenching up Boyd's Lane and stuff, that's gonna have an impact on traffic. Those are the kind of things that are gonna impact the town. Those are the things that I wanna make sure are addressed through this process. And I know some of that gets done through the permitting process and some of it does not. There's not always an opportunity for public comment, public input on some of these approvals. So these are the kind of concerns that we need to make sure get addressed. Traffic being a big one for us. It's Route 24. It's Boyd's Lane. These roads are all controlled by the DOT. Anthony Road. It's all controlled by the DOT. So there are concerns that I have with respect to noise, traffic, the environmental impacts along some of those corridors. Mr. Hamilton brought up infrastructure. these are the kind of things that I want to make sure that at least we have, we have our eyes wide open as we move forward. And I'm not sure what the mechanism is for some of these review comments. I know tonight is not that forum. Moving forward, when each application is submitted, you mentioned that you have to start to prepare your applications. Have any applications been prepared for CRMC or DEM, for DOT?
We have not submitted CRMC. We are in the midst of preparing, and similar with DEM. And we're in discussions with DOT on through their process. We've had several recent meetings with them to line up how they want us to submit and catalog all the infrastructure similar to the gas pipeline of all along, and come forth with, in effect, I'll call it a design review, which that you then submit the permits. I would, if I may, highlight that had the appreciate the interchange with the staff here at town and discussing things with the head of Department of Public Works, Brian Woodhead, and others, and talking about the issues you brought up about traffic, what you would do to a shoulder, and of course on Anthony Road when you transition from a DOT road to a local road, and conditions that would be put on that.
Okay. Do you have a checklist of, I saw in the application, there was I think it was, there was a section 9 was identifying a lot of the mitigation. Section 10 is all of the permit requirements. So at some point you'll be coming before the town for certain approvals. Do you know what those approvals are going to be? Are you able to identify any of those tonight?
I would just say in general, and I would lean on my permitting colleagues to go through the details. But yes, they are on the list of a whole review of, as you note, traffic plans, curb cuts, a variety of possibilities of conditions on when construction can occur, noise limitations. So there is a host of items that are assumed by ourselves that we need to address.
Okay. Thank you, Lawrence. That's okay. I'm good. I mean, I know you both have questions or comments or maybe multiple, so I don't know who was first.
Linda.
Okay, I just want to push back a little bit about what Mr. Hamilton said about the need for additional natural gas infrastructure construction, because back in November of 2020, if I'm reading from the Mr. McGaw's report, we did unanimously approve a letter telling National Grid to discontinue a portable LNG facility at Old Mill Lane as soon as possible, and saying it's not an appropriate remedy to our long-term energy supply needs. So I just want to point you in that direction as well. We wanted a moratorium on natural gas hookups as well. But also, my question about climate change considerations wasn't simply, are you guys taking into account what would protect your investment? It was more that, are you going to do anything that will increase the flooding and climate change risks that face Island Park and Common Fence Point? I don't understand the physics of how that might work, but I would hope that you very much consider if you're going to exacerbate the flooding problems that are in those two communities somehow, or hurt them and their ability to withstand climate change.
Thank you for your points, Madam Vice President. To the last one, one of the further reasons of not going through, again, the top of the Sakana is the fragile area on Teddy Beach and the seawall on the Portsmouth side. And that particular area, which, as you note, is susceptible to a significant storm, such as the storm that took the old Stone Bridge out of 38, and how coming through this path that we are presenting is a not contributing to storm, if I may, vulnerability, if that's a way to put it, and consider that this is a much better way to approach.
So is this your primary plan or are you still exploring going in the Secana?
This is our primary plan.
Okay. But you're still exploring going in the Secana as an alternative, perhaps?
We are not at this moment, no.
Okay. So it doesn't escape me that most of the property of which you would be using is governed by the state of Rhode Island. What benefit would there perhaps be for Portsmouth? Will our energy bills go down? Will you pay taxes on some portion of the equipment that's in town, et cetera?
Well, that's another reason why we've engaged a couple times and with the Economic Development Committee and with some of the executive committee members there on efforts that they're pursuing. As I noted on the timeline, we're fairly early stages here, and that we need to come and discuss this further with the town that arrives at the right benefit and the right package.
Just to add on that, apologies, is your question was what's the direct benefit? There will be infrastructure. And if there's infrastructure in Portsmouth, obviously there's tax bases associated with it, but we'd be more than willing to work with the town about what agreement, what sort of strategy works optimally. So yes, there will be direct benefit. There'll also be, work done here. There will be jobs, there'll be income tax paid. There's benefits to the greater part of Rhode Island as well.
Just adding some commentary, but I think there's also a greater good benefit in that you're producing renewable energy and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and that benefits everybody in the region. But that aside, I think the bureaucracy of this is probably way above my pay grade, but I would be curious to know if there's been any kind of discussions with Ørsted and Bay State, because they do have documents online that shows their interconnect coming up the Sakonnet. So to President Aguiar's point, has Bay State committed to using the holes that you drill now when they come in and want to connect to Brayton Point? I would hate to have them show up in 4 years and say they want to go up the Sakonnet, and then we have wires going around and encircling all of Island Park. Some level of coordination, I think, would be nice to know that everybody's kind of marching to the same tune. I know all these lease areas, most unfortunately, are all being developed differently on different paces, and everybody is having to expend exorbitant amounts of money to get all of their ducks in a row individually, and there seems to be very little collaboration between different lease areas and leaseholders. But when it comes to drilling under the town of Portsmouth, I think some level of coordination would be, appreciated and would benefit us in the long run. And then just a side note to your point about Teddy's Beach and the Stone Bridge, we would love to rebuild it. So if that lined up with your construction plans, would love to talk about that. So.
That
was a good one.
Gotta throw it in there. Gotta throw it in there.
Mr. Councilman, did you have a comment? So I did have a final kind of closure from the council side of things, at least closure at the moment. So procedurally, you've got a line coming up. Your plan so far seems you get to Boyd's Lane, you get to Anthony Road, and then you're waiting for the results of different assessments to determine which path. You mentioned that you had your two preferred paths might be the two furthest to the east, which impact Montauk Country Club. Then the third one is across the Salt Marsh area. Fourth one is continuing up Boyd's Lane to the Mount Hope Bridge. From our perspective of trying to, stay focused on the topic, at what point will you know which path or which course you're going? Is that you won't know until you go through the permit process with CRMC and DEM, or is there a different driver for which path you're going to take?
It's a mix of both. It is dealing with landowners and with the regulators to refine the preferences. Plus what I referenced on the geotech to look at the science and the soil conditions.
So if, so you're really presenting all 4 scenarios at this point to the agencies? If you were, or you're not going to apply to CRMC until you know which course you're taking, or I guess I'm just trying to figure out how this moves forward from a review process.
Well, I would answer further your part of your first question is, I think it will be sooner rather than later that we will refine and define this.
Okay.
And yes, the agencies are asking us to define our preferences so that they don't spend multiple efforts.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. So if there's no more comments from counselors.
I just have one more follow-up to Ms. Ujifusa's point of, yes, we did request that there end the use of Old Mill Lanes as a backup plant, but that has no end in sight. My main concern is your construction of a cable or multiple constructions of cables and tearing up the only gas pipeline to this island. And having a redundancy is very important to this island, not only for heating homes, but also for economic development, because every single restaurant in Newport, Portsmouth, and Middletown runs on natural gas. It's not going anywhere. You and I can agree on that.
No. Okay. So now after tonight, you are also putting on a presentation on the 16th for virtual?
Correct.
A virtual presentation on the 16th for citizens within the town to also make comments, correct?
It's focused on Portsmouth residents. We've conducted a mailing to really try to get that involvement. So everyone knows about it and make it simple, but it is an open, anyone can register.
Okay, thank you. So before I open this up to some comments, again, folks, this is not a public hearing. If you have some comments and you can be brief and concise, that would be helpful. We've covered a lot tonight with some of the councils concerned and the information that was provided. So I will allow you to speak. I just ask you to just try to be on point and we'll allow, I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to speak.
Peter Roberts, 80 Armard Avenue. What I want to tell you is, I'm just going to tell you, you take it for that. With the Secana Bridge area, any of the metals there, you can go on the Tiverton side, hook cable to it and drag it right out with a bulldozer. Or you can send divers in and cut it into certain pieces in case it's together and drag it right out. There's no problem with it. And another thing, when you're going through this area, especially with tides, like at the Old Stone Bridge, the time when you do most of your work is when low tide is in, all right? Then it's going to be pretty calm. But what you do is you have concrete built things that your cables go through. I've done it for many miles. And in most of them, on one side, you can put 2 cables, on the other side, put 2 cables. There are some that will put more cables in, and we call them saddles, all right? And you dig down and you set these in the ground in the hole. Then you have a cover that's concrete, comes down, and pins fit into the holes, so no tide whatsoever can take them off, right? And you put them all together, and you pull your cable through them. They're there, and then tide has nothing to do with it or anything else. And another thing, as far as going through by the Secana River Bridge or Stone Bridge, there's no problem putting this stuff in there and boats going through. Because the only boats that are going to hit anything would be sailboats. And the ones that can go under Secana River Bridge don't have a keel big enough to reach down. Now, that used to happen at the opening of the bay, because back in the day when they made the rum and they would come and get it at the mansions where they had tunnels going down to the wall, right? They couldn't come in there because the keels were too big on them. And that's still a problem there. So depth really doesn't have any problem with it, all right? And you can put them in these concrete homes that you make for them and put it right on through there. And you can go a little bit past that, all right? And as far as climate change, this stuff is going to be underwater. What difference is it going to make if the sea level rise? They're still underwater. The only thing that climate change is going to do is flood the area. It's going to do nothing to the cable. So there's no reason even mentioning that. And as far as going through there, put it through there instead of dragging it all the way across our town. And another thing, I've worked on many jobs, where especially highline jobs, where when we got near wetlands or sea marshes, believe me, the rules we had to go through were so bad that most of the time we routed something another way, even towers, because there's rules you cannot make any mistakes with. And they're going to go by the saltwater marsh right there on Boys Lane. And across on the other side, there's the wetland. And then you go up by the other side of 24, you got a few more of them there. And when you get to where they want to go back out into Mount Hope Bay, that's all wetland. They are going to cause a lot of trouble there. And we know at our beach, you go in there and there's a lot of places you are in mud. So when they talk about going down for this other stuff, believe me, it's not going to be that easy, and it's all going to cave in, and on the tides, it's going to wash out. Now, what we would do, especially if we were digging under something, as we dug, we sent pieces in to seal the hole. All right, so later on, we could send something right through it. Now, a lot of jobs we did, we sent metal beams under that were 32 inches around, and you beat them in, all right? Now you take like the job I was on in Boston for the Silver Line. That was over on the south side, all right? When we were doing the tunnel for the buses to go through to go to South Station, we hit granite. And that's right there where the river is. We couldn't blow it because the houses and buildings there were on stilts. So we had to go in there with rigs and drill through that, okay? And these rigs are the same ones we used on the railroad that we drug down on rocks and everything. But this, you bring the boom down and you go in and you can do different angles. And we drilled through it all. I mean, this is cheaper than what they're going to do in Portsmouth.
Mr. Roberts, I appreciate the comments and I understand what you're saying. And I think a lot of what you're referring to is more the means and methods for how the thing
And
could
we
be
could
built.
check it all out. And believe me, I have worked on these jobs.
I respect your opinions, and I think they will, when you mentioned the wetlands and the different criteria, and I think they will find out just how challenging it might be to get through this permitting process.
Yeah,
So,
well, I personally believe it's all they're making.
okay, that's, thank you, Mr. Roberts.
Good evening.
Yes.
Ben Farrell, 23 Gideon Mountain Lane. Good evening. I have a couple comments. I assume this is the first sort of significant public exposure to this project. And it has been going on for a while, including the acquisition or the leasing of land out in the ocean and things like that. What I'd strongly recommend that the town put together is a timeline of decision points, regulatory decision points. When are artifacts going to be produced, data artifacts? Lay that all out. So then we can plan our engagement with the process in a way that doesn't that allows us time to get involved. To Mr. Katzman's point, if we wanted to engage a professional team to support us, that needs to be done within a certain time frame in order to be effective. If, for example, we wanted to engage with Falmouth or other communities that are involved, so that we're bound to be dealing with very similar problems. But the main thing is lay this thing out so that we know when their artifacts are being produced, when they're being reviewed. That'll allow us to be ahead of this decision instead of chasing, potentially chasing after. The other two kind of, putting on an engineering hat and getting down in the mud is I agree with Mr. Kelly's point. What's in it for Portsmouth? If this thing is coming through us, that gives us negotiation leverage. And, you know, Alaskans get paid for the oil that gets produced in Alaska. Maybe, you know, we can arrange for a STEM program to be financed by these folks, something like that. We're in a negotiating position early, so there may be an opportunity to do that. And then my second point is from an engineering perspective or from a program development perspective, the only way to assess the goodness of a proposal is to know what else has been considered and how those alternatives have been rated. For example, as these guys were talking, the thing that came to my mind is, why not run this stuff up up Narragansett Bay and make a right turn at the Mount Hope Bay? Why squeeze it, you know, squeeze 4 or 5 different companies, jam it up our little Sakonnet River? Maybe a little longer, you know, but in any case, you're going through the ocean and you're laying cable. So it may be advantageous to kind of drive these folks to present alternatives, or even cause them to look at alternatives. So that's all I have.
Thank you. And Mr. Frill, you brought up a good point about the timeline.
Yes.
And I think Lawrence can confirm, in your application, you have a kind of a permitting timeline. But it's really up to the applicant and when they're going to submit the permits, because I think it's probably a dynamic process. Sometimes your studies may take a little longer, but in their application that they provided a link to, each one of these agencies, they have tentative filing dates for. So there is some good information. I think we have to kind of digest it a little bit and plan accordingly. But you brought up some
Thank you
very
very
good
much.
points.
You guys have a great day.
Thank you.
Spoken like a true former project manager at Raytheon engineer. Thank you.
Are there any other folks? I know, I thought I saw some comments come on. Is there anything that hasn't been
So Frank asked if there's any health studies on HVDC high voltage direct cables associated with residential properties.
Yeah, I guess if you can answer some of these.
Yes, so Frank, there are a variety of studies around the world. I think it's important because there are not a lot of these studies, but they are existing in the United States. They are in residential areas, and these also in the seabed. Both of these studies within the documentation that is referenced within the EFSB, those reports are linked there, and you can quite easily find them.
And then Ted Pites, he asked what I asked, what's in it for us, basically. Arthur Palmer, he suggested to your question, Linda, that we engage with Narragansett. Because Block Island wind goes through their town beach. And then Mr. Lawmore, same question I asked earlier too.
And then there's a gentleman has a raised hand.
Oh, I missed that.
Yeah.
Nope,
Okay.
Joy
We have
Forgio.
Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, this is Joe Forgione from 28 Quidnick Ave. Thank you, Town Council President Aguirre. I would have liked to have had equal time since they ran for 21 minutes, since I'm representing a group of residents who have spent considerable time investigating this on our own. But I promise you I will go from 6 to 7 minutes. I have a recommendation to make at the end, so if you could please allocate the time. First and foremost, my wife and I chose to relocate several years ago to Portsmouth to make it our permanent home because we believe it's a wonderful environment for families and empty nesters like us. And the reason that this group got involved is because we want to make sure that this is preserved for ourselves and new residents forever. And we want to eliminate any risk associated with this proposal. Just to give you a little bit of background, some of the people that went up to speak had very brilliant comments and are much more experienced than I am. But my background, just so you know, is I've been a president of technology companies for over 30 years. I have a bachelor's in electrical engineering from a university in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I've studied this since I started corresponding with Mr. Mott in April of this year when he gave a presentation to the Portsmouth Economic Development Committee. And there's numerous holes in everything that he said since then and also tonight that I wanted to share with you. And my recommendation is we could get through this as a win-win situation by making a couple of moves and hiring somebody to represent us and do an analysis. So just to tell you why this group got so passionate, some of are here today is we want to make sure it stays special and we want to eliminate the risks and have a transparent, open process on the selection of the route and all of the activities that take place during and after construction. I've asked time and time again for detailed engineering analysis. I know how to analyze engineering documents. And all I get is one sentence answers. We can't go up to Secana. Yes, you can, okay? I will prove it to you. The gentleman before the black shirt and the hat, he said it so eloquently. It can be done. It's being done around the world. It's being done through ravines and under bridges and over and under hard pan. That just doesn't hold water, okay? Prove me wrong by letting us hire an engineering firm to represent the town to show that we can this fact that it's riskier going through the Secana Bridge. Somebody asked a question about going up to Narragansett. Mayflower Wind had a proposal, an alternative route to come up to Narragansett under the Newport Bridge, under the Mount Hope Bridge, older bridges with faster currents and deeper water. And the only reason why they switched to the land route is because the Navy objected. And we can go into all the reasons why the Navy objected. So that's the first question I have, and they haven't answered it adequately. There's safety risks. The basin, the Secana Basin, where they will start the horizontal direction drilling is 8 feet at low tide. It's where everybody kayaks, windsurfs, swims, trenching and horizontal directional drilling could have severe risks, not just during construction, but ongoing. This is the first time we heard about the fact that it's not going to just be one cable. It may be 2, it may be 3, it may be 4. Maybe we should rename the ocean state to the dig under state, because that's what it could become if we don't go into this with our eyes open. There are impacts of digging and trenching on wildlife. I don't know if any of you look out there, but there's egrets and swans, not just in the Boyd's Lane marshland, but in the Secana Basin. Geese, ducks, they feed. In my research, one of the risks of trenching is mud plumes, okay? And they specifically say in one study that mud plumes are okay in deep water because the mud plumes only rise up 10 to 20 feet, but they get resettled back down. But in shallow water, the mud plumes could be washed up on the shore, destroy the habitat of all those fowl. And also, by the way, one study has even shown that the greatest marine species at risk due to trenching activity is benthic species. I didn't know what it was. You can Google it. I did. Benthic species is mussels, clams, and oysters. Okay, so I haven't seen any studies that talk about that. There's electromagnetic field studies that have shown that there's huge risks. We have impacts of construction. Some people have talked about the geology. I've looked into that. Vibration of horizontal drilling could create sinkholes up and down Boyd's Lane, across Anthony Road. Houses adjacent to that might be at risk. You probably saw some of my comments in the Portsmouth Times where I said, who's going to compensate the people if this happens? Okay, Have there been any discussions with private landowners? Another question. Residential companies or golf courses to basically compensate that for the routing. Somebody brought that up as well. So, and here's a big one. So I'm going to get to my final question to give you back some time, right? I did a calculation. Okay, Congress counselor. I actually testify in Congress in my industry. So, Town Councilor Abbott, you mentioned the issue about green. I'm pro-green energy. I believe it's a really good thing. I believe that we have to complement fossil fuels by doing it, but I don't believe as a result of it, we should risk our environment. We should risk our recreational activities. We should risk everything that makes Portsmouth special in order to get there, all right? There are 6.8 million residents in Massachusetts. There's 1.1 million residents in Rhode Island, approximately the latest census. There's 17,000 residents in Portsmouth. You do a calculation, right? Let's assume energy gets distributed equally from Brayton Point across all of Rhode Island and Massachusetts, right? We get 0.2% of the benefit. That's 17,000 over 7.9 million. And we bear 100% of the burden, okay? For 0.2% of the benefit. So here's an alternative route that, that you could look at, Mayflower Way. Landing on Westport Horseneck Beach, go up the right of way through Westport, go across Watauga Pond into Fall River, where there's many rights of ways for power cables, across to Brayton Point, all Massachusetts, the state and the area that gets 99.28% of the benefit will actually bear the burden. Why isn't that the right way to do it? It could be done. So here's my recommendation. And I, as a resident, a homeowner, a taxpayer, we cannot ever allow something of this impact to our town based upon, I don't know if I'm on video, based upon marketing brochures and legal maneuvering by a developer. If we do that, then, I don't know what the word to use. We need to have ourselves represented by people who could stand up and say, no, what you just said about going up Secaucus is incorrect. Engineering, it can be done. And I don't know the reason. One of these days, we're going to find out the reason. Something has happened, some deal has been cut, I don't know what. It can be done, as the gentleman in the black shirt said, they can go in and out and under, they can conduit, they can build tunnels, they can do it, and nobody will even know that it's being done, all right? So it can be done. So here's my recommendation, because I always say, when you come up with a problem, you're obligated to come up with a solution, okay? I recommend that the town council form a special committee to sit down for several days. These cannot be answered in marketing brochures. We need to see engineering designs. We need to ask tough questions, much like a deposition. Councilor Katzman, you would know that. So, and to do it right, the first job of the committee would be to find an engineering firm, hire the engineering firm to represent the town. I contend that it should be a special committee. There's no better example of why we need to do it as a special committee, because this is really important. We don't want to destroy Portsmouth, for posterity. So, and the engineering firm will say, yes, you can do it. Here's why, here's the risks. And maybe they come back and, here's the biggest statement that, you can put in the Portsmouth Times is, I actually hope I'm wrong and there's no risk. I really hope that I'm wrong. But to town council, wouldn't we benefit from doing these studies now and prove that they're right and I'm wrong, rather than find out during construction, or God forbid, 5 years from now, when there's an environmental disaster or somebody gets killed, that I was right? I think we have an obligation to do something. All I want is to get to the truth. I will personally volunteer my time to be part of the special committee on behalf of the town to ask them the tough questions, but I can be fair. And if I'm proven wrong, fine, I'll be happy. That's the first recommendation. The second recommendation is the siting board is meeting later this week, later this month. I think we have an obligation as a town to take a position and write a letter and say, we're still investigating this. Because it could be very easy due to all the lobbying and locking up all the lawyers and all the fancy brochures and webinars for the siting board to say, oh, Portsmouth loves this. Portsmouth agrees with this. It's a done deal. We can't let that happen. We really can't. So I thank you for listening to me. I'm willing to work really hard on behalf of the citizens of town to come up with a solution, but I haven't been getting the answers I think we need in order to go into this with our eyes open. I will submit my comments to the council in writing for the minutes, and I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Forgione. Is Frank done, or Frank put his hand down, or Frank? I know Andrew asked his question on his behalf. Frank, you're muted. Frank, do you still want to talk? No. Okay, maybe. Okay. All right. I just want to redirect one comment that was made. The notice that we received for the Energy Facilities Siting Board specifically states that the board will not hear public comment, as this is a preliminary hearing, but will do so later at appropriate noticed public comment hearing. So the information that's presented tonight is for our information. Your application is already before the Energy Siting Board, correct? The town has filed a notice of what's intervention, which allows us, I guess, reserves our right to follow up with additional information. So I honestly think that the next steps are going to be dictated by your timeline and your application process and your submission. The town does have some responsibility here to pay attention to the process, to watch for when these public notices come out, because everything is time sensitive. So we definitely need to be aware, as that's been mentioned by some folks tonight. And we need to make sure that we are taking appropriate actions. I don't know what those are tonight, but we will continue to have these discussions. I know that there's been some staff discussion, so I trust that we're on it, and we will make the appropriate decisions as necessary. So thank you for your comments. Do you have anything to close with?
I just wanted to thank you for your time and inviting us here. And if there's anything we can provide in the future, we'd be happy to attend future select board meetings and work with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Hubbard. Thank you.
Mr. Aguirre, just to your point that
Yes.
my plan would be to bring forth a resolution that I do have right here, but
Mhm.
because of the way it's on the agenda this evening, can't do anything with it. But that would allow the administration and the council the ability to hire any experts and or legal advice that they would need in the future, and also to request certain things of the Energy Siting Board in the future. So I'll bring that forward at our next meeting, and I'll hand a copy around to everybody now.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Okay, so at this point, no, we do not need to take any action. We can move on to our next item, which is new business number 2, which is the ratification of the fire dispatcher's contract. We'll do them one at a time. We have two items, 2 contracts, and I can't find the memo, but we did have a memo. We have a memo from our solicitor, from our attorney, that from Mike Orsillo that was part of the collective bargaining process. And he is basically saying that the contracts that are before us tonight are, he has reviewed them and found them to be in conformance with what was agreed to in the tentative agreements. And he recommends the council formally ratify both of these collective bargaining agreements. So what I'd like to do is just take them one at a time. If there's any questions or comments from councilors.
I'll just
Mr.
quickly
Rainey?
review.
Yeah.
For the dispatcher contract. Well, first off, let me just state that there are 3 contracts that we've been working on for the better part of a year. 2 of them brought before you tonight. The fire contract with the fire department will be brought hopefully at the next meeting. Changes that we propose in the dispatcher contract and that we have tentatively agreed to with the bargaining unit. The contract would be for a period of 5 years, vice 3 years. We changed sick time to 5 days per year, vice the convoluted hourly rate that was in the original contract, and it makes it easier for payroll purposes. The town will place 20 sick leave shifts into a sick leave bank, which would be available for those who exhaust their sick time in any year and would be used only by the approval of the fire chief. We added domestic partners to the definition of immediate family for bereavement purposes. The annual leave schedule was modified to shifts, vice weeks, and it more closely coincides with the dispatcher work environment. We also increased the town health savings contribution from $500 to $1,000 for family coverage and from $250 to $500 for single health coverage. And then lastly, we have tentatively agreed to 2% pay raises for each of the 5 years. Lisa Pulio will highlight the financial impact of the proposed CBA. And then concluding your discussion and subject to your concurrence, I would respectfully request your ratification of this proposed agreement by and between the town and local 1949 fire 4th class dispatchers.
Thank you, Mr. Rayner.
As town administrator noted, it is a 5-year contract with 2% salary increases for each year. You'll notice though in fiscal year 24 that it states that it's a 4% increase. We have a new hire, so that person will be going through the step process of an increase. But you'll see through the rest of the years that it is a 2% increase consistently. And the HSA contribution, as noted, did increase from $250 to $500 for an individual plan and $500 to $1,000 HSA contribution. And those are really the only 2 financial impacts to this contract.
The spreadsheet that's posted online and on the agenda shows a 1.02% increase per year.
For
except
fiscal
the
year
1.
23.
For 23, it's 1.02, then you put 1.04.
Right, 1.04, as I just said, is because we have a new hire that just started, so that person will have a step increase.
It's the smallest union, the smallest contract. It's good to have it for 5 years. I move that we approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Mr. Jukusa? Aye.
Hold on a second. I don't know if you have any comment from the
No.
audience members.
Any comments, questions? No, Mr. Fitzmaurice?
Thank you, Mr. President. Larry Fitzmaurice, 50 Kristen Court. Is the vote here tonight to approve this agreement?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Some of the comments I couldn't quite hear, so I wasn't sure what was going on. Do we have a fiscal impact statement for this agreement?
Yes. Yes.
All right, let me have a copy.
21.
It's supposed to be published.
It is on the packet. It's on page 21 of the agreement.
Well, it's supposed to be published. That doesn't.
It's on
make it
page
published.
21 of the agreement. It was published on Thursday night.
Well, I'll bring a copy of the law to the next meeting. Thank you.
So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Capson?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0.
Thank
Okay.
you.
You take on the next one?
Yes. Okay, so the next contract is with the PMEA. Those are essentially the town hall employees. Significant changes in this contract other than language clarification, gender neutrality edits, and changes to reflect current organizational positions and titles include, again, this would be a 5-year vice 3-year contract. Salaries through the 5 years would be 2% in 22, in 2023, 2.5%, 2024, 2.5%, 2025, and 2026, both 2%. Note that the union would have the right to a wage reopener. In other words, a request to renegotiate those wages increases in years 2025 and 2026. We will move a C clerk from the tax assessor, tax collector, tax assessor's office to the administrative level with a 4-step scale beginning in year 3 of the agreement. We would also move the wastewater manager, register of voters, administrative town clerk, administrative accounts payable, accounts receivable clerk, and the administrative assistant to the police chief to a 4-step system beginning in year 3. They're already in that step system. That would just complete their 4th step. We modified the requirements of the Prudence Island Public Safety Officer to the extent that that officer shall be a graduate or be certified by the Rhode Island Municipal Police Academy in the 1st year of employment. We also stipulate that after being employed for 3 years, the Prudence Island Public Safety Officer shall be paid the annual salary paid to the rank of senior patrolman. And then after being employed for 4 years, he would be paid or she would be paid to the rank of the senior patrolman plus an additional $2,000. We modified the steps to full pay for new hires. They would receive 80% in the 1st year in their 1st year of hire. They would go to 90% in their 2nd year, and then they would receive full pay in their 3rd year, at the beginning of the 3rd year. We modified the stipend for the animal control officer from $1,000 to $5,000. We changed the 401A contribution from 8% to 9% for the employees in the town. The Juneteenth federal holiday was added. We clarified the annual leave schedule to incorporate hours, which allows for partial use of vacation days. We added an option to sell back a maximum of 5 leave days per year as long as the town is notified by March 1st. We added domestic partner to the definition of immediate family for bereavement purposes. We agreed that there will be no deduction from sick leave for enforced quarantine when established by the Department of Health or a qualified physician for the period of such quarantine. We changed the employee health insurance contribution from 15% to 20%. And then we changed the town contribution to the flexible saving arrangement, the FSA account, from $2 to $3 for every $1 contributed by the employee. But all we did is we still capped it at $500, which is in the current contract. So it just allows them to build up sooner in the year rather than waiting throughout the whole year. So there's no cost to the town. Lisa Pulio will highlight the financial impact of this proposed CBA. And as I said before, subject to your concurrence and discussion and concurrence. Afterwards, I respectfully request that you ratify this proposed agreement by and between the town and the Portsmouth Municipal Employees Association.
Thank you, Mr. Rayner.
The 5-year contract total increase is $123,440.33. Outlined, you can see the salary increase based on the financial impact. The increase is $191,000. The stipend for the 5 years to the animal control officer is $25,000 total. The sellback days was a projection based on 3 people with a maximum of 15 days. Again, we don't know how many people will take advantage of that. The biggest savings here is the medical copay, which went from 4% of salary to 20% of premium. and 90% of the individuals were at 4% of the salary. So that provides a total of $119,000 savings. Again, that's projected based on a 5% healthcare cost increase each year. We're not sure really what that is, so I took that as a guide. So overall, as I said, the total cost for the 5 years is $123,440.33.
Thank you, Lisa.
Motion to approve the
Second.
PMEA contract.
Second.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes.
Mr. Aguirre, Mr. President, I just want to note,
Yeah.
a lot of work went into getting us
Yeah.
to today by town administrator, town staff, and our negotiators. I just want to thank them for those efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Katzman. Motion passes 7-0. Thank you, Mr. Rayner, for all the work along with the staff. Okay. Item number 4 was the discussion and approval of the town council fiscal year 22-23 goals and priorities for the town administrator. You wanna-
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to move this item to the next town council meeting. Their backup was inadvertently not attached.
Do we need a motion or we just do it? We just
Motion to table till next week.
Yeah.
The next
Second.
meeting, excuse me.
second. All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. New business number 5. It's a request approval of an MOU for a cesspool and septic system replacement grant program using $500,000 in previously approved opera funds. Mr. Rayner.
Yeah, what we presented to you is the proposed MOU. Bottom line is, this would help protect people that fall between the cracks who, even though they would technically be eligible for the CISLIP loan program, even with that small interest rate, they wouldn't be able to afford the repayment cost to that loan. So using ARPA funds, as you previously approved, $500,000. We've worked with Church Community Housing to establish a program where those people would be eligible to take out the minimum loan possible or no loan and get a grant or a grant to either supplant the loan that they could afford or a full grant that would allow them to replace their cesspools with septic systems or replace their undocumented or failed septic programs. And the idea would be that the Church Community would administer this program for us, much the same way that Rhode Island Housing administers the CISLIP program. It would all go through Todd Drake, our wastewater manager, who's here tonight to answer any specific questions. And we would exercise this program until the money runs out.
So I just have one quick question. By federal law with the ARPA monies, we have to expend them by the 2026. If perchance they're not expended by July of 2026, what is our backup plan in terms of coming out of this MOU and using that monies for something else so we don't lose the monies and have to give it back to the
That's a
feds?
great question. We're looking into that right now. It may be that we've already obligated this money. There's two ways to account for the money. Because we received less than $10 million, it all got moved into the general fund, technically. So that may have already spent the money. We may have already met this obligation. So if that's not the case, we will come back to you with a workaround.
Motion to approve the memorandum of understanding with Church Community Housing for cesspool replacement program.
Second.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. Moving on to number 6, it's Rhode Island Energy proposes to relocate pole 1 on Sequoia Lane, 11 feet east.
Council President, members of the council, I went out there and inspected. Russ Nelson marked the poles. behind the hedge line, but I mean, it's 11 feet, it's gonna be on the property line, so just request for it to be approved.
Move to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Capson?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. Number 7 is Rhode Island Energy asks permission to replace direct bury cable with cable and conduit system along Sandy Point Farm Road, I guess URD. Install 4 new pole boxes on Adams Drive, Fisher Circle, Taylor Road for access to cables. Mr. Woodhead.
Council President, members of the council, can we table this till next council meeting? Because I have a little conflict of what they have linear footage and what the plan says, so. they're gonna
Motion to table.
readdress it.
Second for a quick question though.
Yeah.
Are they planning, this is all done
Horizontal directional.
through people's yards, like, Dr. Ryan's. They're not going to tear up the brand new pavement we put
No,
down.
they're gonna do horizontal directional drilling, just like they did when they did Adams Drive. They came down Adams Drive and tied into Fisher Circle. They're just gonna do from Taylor Road, down Taylor Road, up towards what's that? Fisher's Copper Beach, past Copper Beach, and they're gonna go down Fisher Circle and loop around all the way back up to Fisher.
So minimal disruption, and they're not going to destroy the new pavement. we
I've
just
already
put down.
told them about that. They're totally aware of that. So, yeah,
So we'll table this until our next meeting.
next meeting, because there's an extension part of it too, because there's another part from Adams Drive down to Fisher Circle coming from Sandy Point.
Okay.
Because they have another permit coming in. So if you could table that, would be great.
All right, then just a motion to table it.
And a second.
Motion to table to the
Second.
next meeting, yes.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott? Aye. Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Capson?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. And number 8, request approval to award the fire station roof replacement to Silktown Roofing, Inc. for $235,000.
Council members, Council President, members of the council, we went out to bid for the fire station roof replacement. On the roof replacement, there was 2 sections. It was section A and section B. Section A was over the living quarters and section B was over the apparatus bay. We just want to make sure we had enough funds, and as we got the bid back in, we do have enough funds for this. So I'd just like to request the council for approval of the $235,000 to Silktown Roofing, Inc.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Capson?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you.
Okay, and now, number 9, it's our Prudence Island Town Council meeting, annual meeting there. Tentatively scheduled here for September 10th, 2022. So I know it's a Saturday after Labor Day, but we got to fit it in. So I'm hoping that everybody can plan accordingly, and we'll have some good representation out there on the 10th.
It's gonna be in the morning, right?
It will be in the morning. Generally, it's 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at the latest.
By noon.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay,
Sounds good.
so we're good for the September 10th. And then we just have correspondence.
Motion to receive and place on file.
Second.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Capson?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. Future meetings, again, August 22nd, September 10th, September 12th, and September 26th.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Capson?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. Thank you all. Have a good evening, and we will see you on the 22nd. Thanks, everyone.